Have you ever experienced something so terrifying, so chilling, that it makes you question the very world around you? Tonight, as the rain beats relentlessly against your window, close your eyes and listen carefully, for I will tell you 3 true horror stories that took place on stormy, rainy nights that will haunt you long after the thunder fades. These are stories you might wish you could forget, but once you hear them, you'll never be the same again. It was a dark, rainy night and the roads were slick with water. Mike, a truck driver, was heading back home after a long day of work. The rain had started to come down harder and the visibility was low. The headlights of his truck barely pierced through the sheets of rain. He drove cautiously, hoping to get home quickly. As he passed through a desolate stretch of highway, he noticed something up ahead, a figure standing by the roadside, drenched but still waving for a ride. A hitchhiker, Mike thought. Not unusual in these parts, especially with the storm so fierce. Mike slowed down and rolled down his window slightly. The hitchhiker, a young woman in a tattered raincoat, leaned in. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her hair was wet and matted to her forehead. She looked desperate. "Can you give me a ride to the next town?" she asked, her voice shaky but pleading. Mike felt a strange unease, but he nodded, and the woman climbed into the passenger seat. As she settled in, she barely spoke, staring out the window. Mike tried to make small talk, but she only gave short answers. Minutes passed. The rain grew heavier, and the road seemed to stretch on endlessly. Mike glanced at her again, her face was now blank, expressionless. He asked her where she was from, but she didn't respond. In fact, she hadn't spoken for a while. Suddenly the truck hit a pothole and Mike swerved. When he looked back to the passenger seat, the woman was gone. The door was still locked and there was no sign of her anywhere. Panicked, Mike pulled over to the side of the road and checked the back seat. Empty. Shaking, he turned around and drove back to the spot where he had picked her up. But all he saw was an empty stretch of road, drenched by the rain. He never saw her again. Some say that woman was never real, that she was a ghost, a hitchhiker who had died years ago, left behind in the storm. Her spirit wanders, waiting for someone to give her a ride, only for her to vanish without a trace. And Mike? He never drove that stretch of road again at night. This next story takes place on a rainy evening just like tonight. Emma, a young woman new to the area, had recently moved into a small cottage on the outskirts of town. The house was old, but it had character, and she loved the quiet, secluded atmosphere. But something about the house didn't feel right. At night, she would hear strange noises, creaks from the floorboards, the sound of whispers drifting through the hallways, even the occasional banging as if something, or someone, was moving about. One particular stormy evening, when the wind howled and the rain lashed at the windows, Emma decided to investigate. She had heard rumors about the house being haunted, but she wasn't one to believe in ghosts. Still, the eerie silence in the air made her skin crawl. As she explored the upstairs rooms, she came across a door, one that had never been opened. It was tucked away in a corner, covered in dust, and had no handle. Intrigued, Emma pushed against it, and the door creaked open with a groan. Inside, she found an attic, dark and musty, filled with old furniture and cobwebs. But what caught her attention was a small, antique mirror in the corner of the room. It seemed oddly out of place. As she approached, her reflection seemed normal at first, but then something shifted. A shadow moved behind her in the mirror. Startled, Emma spun around. Nothing was there. She looked back at the mirror. The shadow was gone. But then, in a chilling whisper, she heard it, soft, almost drowned out by the rain outside. A voice whispered her name. Emma? Frozen in fear, she backed away slowly. The mirror's surface seemed to ripple, as if something was trying to break through. And just as she turned to run, a cold hand brushed against her shoulder. Emma never stayed another night in that house. The next day she packed up and left, vowing never to return. The house still stands, abandoned, its dark secrets locked behind that door. And some say on stormy nights you can hear the whispers calling from within. Finally, we come to the last story, one that will make you think twice before driving alone in a storm. Rachel had just finished a late shift at the hospital. The rain was coming down in sheets as she made her way home. The road was nearly empty, the only sound was the rhythmic tapping of raindrops on her car's roof. As she drove through the winding, empty roads, she felt an odd sensation like someone was watching her. She glanced into the rearview mirror, but there was no car behind her. Still, the feeling persisted. She brushed it off, thinking it was just the stress from a long shift. But when she passed a particularly dark stretch of road, she saw something in the mirror, a figure standing on the side of the road just outside the glow of her headlights. She didn't think much of it at first, but then, the figure started moving. Slowly at first, then faster, as if it was chasing her. Rachel's heart raced. She pressed the accelerator, but the figure kept pace, matching her speed no matter how fast she drove. Panic set in as she looked at the mirror again. This time, the figure was in the rearview mirror, right behind her car, not far off. She could see the details now. A man in a rain-soaked coat, his face pale and distorted, his eyes fixed on her through the glass. Her breath quickened and she swerved the car, speeding down the highway, but no matter how fast she went, the figure remained close. The rain blurred her vision, and every glance in the mirror revealed the same horrifying sight. Finally, Rachel could take no more. She slammed on the brakes, threw open the car door and ran through the storm, never looking back. When she reached a nearby diner, soaked and shaking, she told the attendant her story. The man at the counter smiled nervously and said, "You're lucky. I've heard that same story before. People say the man in the rear view is a spirit, a ghost that haunts this road waiting for someone to stop. And once you see him in your mirror, you're never safe again." Rachel never drove that road again, and no one has heard from her since. 3 stories, 3 chilling encounters, and the storm rages on outside, carrying with it the whispers of things we cannot see. So the next time the rain falls and the night grows cold, remember, you're not the only one out there in the dark. Sleep tight, if you can.